After Aegon and his dragons burned our last king, Harren the Black, and broke our armies, the defeated Ironborn chose my ancestor, Rickon Greyjoy, as Lord of the Iron Islands, not king. The stories claim that the Old Way died with Harren the Black and his sons at Harrenhal. Our ships and axes were no match for Aegon's dragons, so our ancestors bent their steel into fishhooks and our kingdom into villages, and started telling the red tales around the fire of how we used to be strong, and how one day we would be so again. Generations later, a young boy listened to them. Dalton Greyjoy, the wild young heir to Pike, was rowing at 5 and reeving at 10 in the Basilisk Isles with his uncle. By 14, Dalton had sailed as far as Old Geese, fought in 12 battles, and claimed 4 soft wives. In his 15th year, he avenged his uncle's death in battle, but he took 12 wounds and emerged from the fight, drenched head to heel in blood. From that day forth, men called him the Red Kraken. During the Dance of Dragons, the Red Kraken picked the side that was fighting the Lannisters, and fell upon the Westerlands while the Lannisters were up at war. Casterly Rock itself proved too strong, once the Lady of the Castle barred its gates. But the Ironborn burned the Lannister fleet and sacked Lannisport, carrying off gold, grain, and hundreds of women and girls, including Lord Lannister's favorite mistress and all his bastards. The Red Kraken now ruled the Sunset Sea as his forebears had, and his longships again brought the Old Way to the coast of Westeros. But then the war ended, and the mainland armies came home. The Iron Throne commanded the Red Kraken to stop reeving, and when he didn't, a mistress opened his throat as he slept. While his son squabbled, the Lannisters sent their soldiers to the Iron Islands. Thousands of men, women, and children were put to the sword, and scores of villages and hundreds of longships were put to the torch. The glorious return to the Old Way had lasted almost 2 years.
It should not be hard to recruit lords into a war against an enemy known as the Mad King. We can even understand the lords who chose to honor their oaths and fight for him. But the Krakens of House Greyjoy set out Robert's rebellion on Pike with their tentacles up their arse.
My father Quellen was old, and sitting is what old people do best. Well, second best. He would have sat out the whole war if not for my brother and me. We convinced him that nobody would fear the wolves of the sea if we curled up by our fires while others feasted on the spoils of the Mad King. So the old man creaked into his rusty armor and set sail for the Reach, only to be routed by Tyrell longboats. When my father sadly fell in battle, my older brother Balon beat a tactical retreat to his own inheritance as the new lord of the Iron Islands.
I'd rather die in the Reach than live on the Iron Islands.
The roses are prettier to pluck, but my brother was getting old and felt that longing to sit, and the sea stone chair was as good a place as any. Within a few years, he realized that sitting is only fun if everyone else has to stand. He had the priest reforge. No, that's not right. They picked up sticks on the beach, wove them into a new ancient driftwood crown, and declared Balon the king of the Iron Islands. Unfortunately for my brother, the other king in Westeros, Robert Baratheon, was famously bad at sharing, and his father by law and warden of the West, Tywin Lannister, had a mighty fleet at Lannisport within striking distance of the Iron Islands.
Yes, you were very clever, and how brave, burning our ships at anchor in the night.
They would have burned the same in daylight. Iron's a lazy beast. You didn't rouse until long after I set fire to your proud mane. I planned it all, you know. My first torch took your father's flagship. If it makes you feel better, we didn't loot it. Out of respect. And time.
I don't think I ever saw Robert happier than the day he heard about the Greyjoy rebellion. He'd been king for a handful of years, and many handfuls of other things, and it was clear to him and everyone else how ill-suited he was to rule. But battle he could do. Unfortunately, by the time we raised our army, we seemed to be winning the war. Balon's eldest son, your nephew, died trying to storm Seagard, and his men were thrown back into the arms of their drowned god. If we wanted battle, we'd have to hurry north before the Ironborn put down their own rebellion.
And we would have, if I'd had my way. Rebelling was a stupid idea.
Never stopped your people before.
Before Balon put those sticks on his head, I told him that if he wanted to rule the Iron Islands, all he had to do was give King Robert a tour of them. Why waste our forces fighting a war we couldn't win for a place our enemy wouldn't want? With the Iron Fleet, we could reef not just Westeros, but the rich lands beyond the Sunset Sea. But my brother was too attached to that seastone chair. He commanded me to sail the Iron Fleet against Robert's navy before we could ferry his army to Pike.
A navy commanded by Robert's younger brother, Stannis, most known for sitting in a besieged castle eating dogs and horses. Remind me, how did you fare against a man who'd never commanded ships in battle?
Nearly too well.
Stannis smashed your Iron Fleet at Fair Isle.
After I sailed it into a strait, where our numbers and the size of our ships would work against us. It took some doing to convince my men to rush into such an obvious trap. Stannis was not a subtle man.
You would rather claim treason than defeat.
Victory would have only delayed it. We couldn't hold off Robert's forces forever, but we could waste enough Ironborn that we wouldn't even fill our own islands after the war. I made sure the silence escaped. That was enough for me. That, and watching your army smash my brother's castle soon afterwards.
Why didn't you just abandon him after Fair Isle? Why risk your precious life fighting for him at Pike?
I wanted to kill the best knights in Westeros.
You failed.
So did you. I expected pursuit when I fled Pike on the silence. But I suppose you were too busy not punishing my brother to not punish the man who burned your father's fleet.
Where the North has its honor and the South its chivalry, the Iron Islands has its strength.
We call ourselves the Ironborn, and we are warriors feared throughout the Seven Kingdoms.
Or so we used to be. Unlike their mainland cousins, the first men of the Iron Islands never bowed to the old gods.
Theirs was the drowned god, who made the Ironborn to reave and sack and write their names in salt, steel, and song, that his enemy, the Storm God, could not wash away. We raised our kings from our own ranks, and used beaten foes as thralls to work our mines and farm our land.
Or as salt wives, if a woman was pretty enough. Such was the old way, and while we followed it, we held sway wherever the waves were heard. When Aegon came demanding fealty, King Harren the Black ruled as far east as the Trident.
Other kings like the Starks could kneel, but Harren was Ironborn, and the Ironborn must be beaten. In Harrenhal, he had the mightiest castle in Westeros, and the army to defend it.
But Aegon did not intend a siege. He mounted his dragon and roasted Harren and all his sons in their tower, and the Old Way with them. Because of Harren's defiance, Aegon pushed the Ironborn back to our islands and gave the Riverlands to the Tullys. But he did allow the Ironborn to choose who would lead them.
House Greyjoy had always been one of the greatest houses of the Iron Islands. We trace our descent from the Age of Heroes and the legendary Grey King, who took a mermaid to wife and made war upon the Storm God for 1,000 years.
Blessed by the Drowned God, the Grey King fought and slew Naga, the great sea dragon, and took her fire for his own.
This history made our ancestor Vicon Greyjoy the natural choice to lead the Ironborn after Aegon's conquest. For 300 years, House Greyjoy ruled the Ironborn. We styled ourselves Lord of the Iron Islands, King of Salton Rock, Son of the Sea Wind, Lord Reaper of Pike.
In truth, we were thralls. Our people still chanted, "What is dead may never die." But the Old Way had died.
until the Targaryens followed their dragons into the grave, and our Lord Father, Balon Greyjoy, rose against the new king, Robert Baratheon.
Dark wings, dark words. I was only a boy when the Raven came to call my father, Lord Eddard Stark, to another war. Balon Greyjoy had raised the Iron Islands in revolt and burned the Lannister fleet at anchor. King Robert Baratheon again needed his old friend. My mother Catelyn was not happy to lose her lord husband to Robert again. 6 years before, he had left her to avenge his father and brother against the Mad King. But now he had sons and daughters of his own, and, unspoken, another son who wasn't hers from the last time he went to war. My brother, Jon Snow. But she knew that in marrying my father, she had married the North. We hold our honor and duty as dear as our old gods. When the time came, my father marched south to restore peace and order to the realm. My father always told me the Iron Islands were a strange and dangerous place. Its people, the Ironborn, keep neither the old gods nor the Seven, and despise all honest toil. Their ancestors ravaged the western shores, and putting it to the torch, and their songs still ring through the halls of the Ironborn, while everywhere else, they're whispered to wayward children at bedtime. Perhaps Lord Balon thought Westeros had not healed from the war against the Mad King, and was as fragmented and suspicious as the ancient kingdoms his forebears had terrorized. Robert's navy corrected him at Fair Isle when they smashed the Proud Iron Fleet. Robert and my father corrected him at Pike, his own castle, when they pulled down his towers and breached his walls. My father never liked to speak of his battles, but from other men I learned what transpired. Thoros of Myr was first through the breach with his flaming sword. Not far behind him was Jorah Mormont of Bear Island, my father's bannerman who earned the knighthood he would later shame, and lords from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms. All day, through every passage in the castle, they fought side by side. My father with our ancestral sword Ice, and King Robert with his warhammer against a horde of axe-wielding Ironborn. In the end, Lord Balon bent the knee. King Robert generously allowed Lord Balon to retain his title and castle. The price of peace was custom. The only son of Balon's to survive his foolish rebellion would be taken as a hostage against future treasons. My father even volunteered to foster the boy himself, I suspect, to make Theon Greyjoy a different man than his father, who would bring honor and duty to the Iron Islands when he returned as heir. So my mother's silent fear came true, and my father returned with another child.